Achtung, Achtung, which is of course German for Achtung, Achtung. It didn't seem right to use the original vernacular. Welcome to We Have Ways of Making You Talk Live. This is not an April Fool. This is not a prank. The live stream is with us. Hello, everyone. Alongside the live stream. Hello from Basingstoke. Hello from Harefield. People in South Africa, Australia, all over the world. Achtung from Sussex. Glenn Towler says, nice beard. Well, I have to agree with Glenn Towler there. This is like a podcast unlike any other. I hope you're all coping with isolation. It could be worse. You could be in a foxhole in Bastogne, holding off an entire German Panzer Division. Or you could be with Johnny Frost. As we can see, James Holland has brought isolation.
Essential piece of kit, Al. Essential piece of kit in these troubled times. What everyone needs is a World War II gas mask. And apparently it is good for COVID-19.
Is it?
Apparently so.
You just like the rubber. Let's be honest now.
That lovely, so special smell.
It's not so bad, is it? I mean, you know, with Netflix, walking the dog, listening to a podcast or two, isolation is tolerable, isn't it? Let's say that, yeah?
It's absolutely fine. It's even better if you're writing a book as well, because that fills the day quite nicely. Yeah,
absolutely. Now, of course, James is in Wiltshire, and you're in the middle of Sicily. We're still talking about Sicily, aren't we?
Yeah. Still very much immersed. I've just been doing the amazing battle for Azzurro, which is where the Hasty Peas, the Hastings and Prince Edward's battalion, managed to clamber up this sort of almost vertical cliff, 1,000-foot cliff in the middle of the night, attack the Germans from above, and hold on throughout the day. I mean, it's the most amazing action. It's completely impregnable, this place. And although it had been a Greek, then a Roman, then a Byzantine, then an Arab, then a Norman strongpoint, it had never, ever been captured from below. Ever. Until the Hasty Peas got there. So the good old Canadians. Volunteers all.
Now, Pete Johnston has popped up on our feed, says, as a historian and museum professional, please do not put on World War II gas masks as they're full of asbestos. That's you, Telt.
Okay. Yes, I'm putting that back in its proper case then. I'd rather get coronavirus than asbestos in my lungs.
Here's a question. Let's get rolling. Here's a question to get us started from David Yields. How prominent in battle were the Scottish pipers, and what did the Germans make of them?
Well, the Highlanders, traditionally they use the pipes. I mean, we've all heard them. You either sort of love them or hate them, but there is a sort of mournfulness about them, isn't there? And the best descriptions I had was from this guy who was in 2 Rifle Brigade, and also a Maori, a guy called Mikey Parkinson, who was in the 28th Maori Battalion on the opening night, 23rd of October 1942, on the opening night of the Second Battle of Alamein. And he had the Highlanders on. Mikey had the Highlanders on his right, and he just said it was just the most amazing sound, because as they were disappearing over into the, across the minefields, you could just see faintly in the kind of moonlight and under the flares these sort of figures of jocks sort of moving forward, the 51st Highland Division, and this amazing sound coming across. And he said, I have no idea what effect it had on the enemy, but he said, all I can tell you, it was one of the most profoundly moving things I ever heard in my life, ever.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it certainly makes me move if I hear it. I mean, I walk quickly past a piper if I possibly can. I mean,
I quite like them, actually. I'm quite partial
I mean, I actually think, you have got that thing that it announces that you're coming. That's what pipes and drums are all about in battle, isn't it? Is it saying in the days where they were actually present on a battlefield?
Yeah,
it's like here we come, and then the drums would be used to dictate marching speed and all that sort of thing. So I mean, but and then famously, of course, is Bill Millin, whose story often told with Lord Lovat. Who, Glenn, I agree, nothing wrong with bagpipes. Glenn Towler says nothing wrong with bagpipes. We're just making mischief. Bill Millin is probably the most famous story with Lord Lovat's Commandos landing on the morning of D-Day, playing the pipes in his landing craft on Sword. And so the story he used to tell was, they must have thought I was mad, so they didn't kill me. I mean, I don't know how he knew that, and after all, considerable luck as to what happened to you coming off Off a
Yeah,
landing
that's
craft
true.
on-
There's a very good statue of him there now as well. And I mean, the
Yeah.
great thing about Bill Millen is he lived to a ripe old age and he used to regularly
Yeah.
go back and do his pipes and stuff. So he became a bit of a sort of party piece, didn't he? Going up there and doing it. But by all accounts, he was a fantastic guy. And I think the bottom line is, if you know, the pipes are a kind of really important part of those Scottish regiments and their identity, and it's kind of what they do. And obviously, it's a big morale thing. We've talked quite a lot about morale over the last few months, haven't we? And that amazing book by Jonathan Fennell and stuff that we've referenced.
Cohesion.
Yeah, about cohesion. And you know, you hear that stuff. I mean, there's a reason why the ancient Celts used to do their battle cry with their carnixes and all the rest of it. And that's because it does have a profound effect on the side for which it's being played and against the enemy as well. I mean, you don't just do it for larks.
Yeah. Yeah,
so I'm all for it. I think it's great.
Andrew Twist says the Australian 6th Divisions were singing "We're off to see the wizard" as they assaulted Bardia.
Very good. Well, there you go.
And Matthew says, apart from on D-Day, what did the Army Commandos do? Well, you've got the Walcheren thing, you've got the Rhine crossing. Army Commandos were kept pretty busy as a sort of because the Commandos weren't just Royal Marine Commandos. During the Second World War, they were, they got reduced after the war just to Royal Marine Commandos. Army Commandos did lots of amphibious stuff as well. Basically,
and the reason they had Navy and they had Royal Marine Commandos and they had Army Commandos is because it was part of combined operations, which was set up, of course, by Rear Admiral Mountbatten, Lord Louis Mountbatten at the time. And these were kind of an extension of SOE. It's all part of this kind of setting Europe ablaze policy that Churchill comes up with in the summer of 1940 during the Battle of Britain. You know, this idea of kitting back. And I saw that someone mentioned the auxiliary units just a moment ago. You know, the auxiliary units were, again, an extension of that, of being prepared to kind of get dirty, get stuck in, close quarter combat, you know, hand-to-hand fighting, sticking commando knives, Fairbairn knives into kidneys, because that's the most... It's so painful if you get stabbed in the kidneys, you just die immediately. And actually, I was just showing you earlier on, Al, this rather good epaulette from... this is from a genuine... battle dress, airborne battle dress of Norman Field, and Norman was in the Royal Fusiliers, managed to get out of Dunkirk, get home, and then he joined up with Peter Fleming and helped set up the auxiliary units. And he was running an area in Kent during 1940, and then later joins the airborne. And this is what he's wearing when he drops in on during Operation Varsity. So a little bit of ephemera for you.
That's very good. Eddie O'Sullivan says, Irish brigade battalions also initially went into battle in the Tunisian campaign to the sound of pipes. Force Captain Murphy and his piper were killed in a counterattack against German forces on Grandstand Hill in January 1943. Eventually, it was decided not to attack to the sound of Irish pipes. That's interesting.
That is interesting.
Because it does announce you're coming, doesn't it? Somewhat.
Yes, but if you've got a massive barrage flying over your head as well as you're advancing, that tends to kind of give the game away as well. I mean, interestingly, you know, they were still a lot of units still wore kilts as well, and they're still using kilts in Sicily, as was Ernst Gunther Bader, who was a regimental commander under Rommel in the desert, and later was in Sicily, and he was given the job of preparing for and protecting the Straits of Messina. And there was nothing he liked more than wearing a kilt and a claymore.
Oh heavens! We're talking. Have we already gone off topic, and now we're on eccentric Nazis?
Yeah.
Right. We have another question. This is from Craig 1940. Hello, chaps. Love the podcast. With James's new Sicily book coming out and Blair Paddy Mayne getting looked at with the SRS, do you think he should have got the VC? The paperwork was even signed by Monty and then changed to bar to DSO. A DSO and 3 bars having met the criteria in different theatres. Was he robbed? Was he denied due to not being able to charm the higher-ups like Sterling could, his history of drinking or brawling? Or was the war the SAS was fighting a new sort of war?
To be perfectly honest, I don't think it's any one of those things. I think when you get a Victoria Cross and you get that as opposed to a DSO, I think there's a certain amount of kind of sort of, you know, what the person who's signing off is thinking on that particular morning. And there's a certain amount of luck to it. I mean, all gongs are, to a certain extent, a bit arbitrary because it depends who witnesses them, it depends who puts you in for it and all those sort of things. I mean, 4 DSOs is pretty good, to be honest. I mean, and the bottom line is, you know, everyone was completely awed by Paddy Mayne. Everyone. I mean, he couldn't possibly have been held in higher esteem if he'd been given a Victoria Cross. And it's not the sort of thing he gave two hoots about, to be perfectly honest.
But let's be... he was... JMCN has just popped up. Was Mayne not a little bonkers?
Yes. He was completely
And now
mad.
Glenn has joined in, who we mentioned earlier. Yes, Mayne was a bit bonkers.
He was a bit bonkers.
He was.
But then lots of people were. I mean, I think you could say Monty was a teeny bit bonkers. I mean, that's fine.
Well, yes, but
Mayne
Mayne let off steam by fighting dockers. That was his thing. Challenging everyone in the bar he was into a fight and beating them all up.
It's very interesting. When he wasn't pissed, he was really softly spoken. And he had a big frame. He was a tall guy, Paddy. And he was one of these people that when he got into a room, you knew it. You know, he just had that amazing charisma that a handful of people have, that when they walk into a room or walk into a gathering, they just feel it. You just go, whoa, I'm in the presence of someone who's a really big, special character. And he just had that. And I remember, you read accounts of people meeting him for the first time. They said, this huge hulk of a man came in, this reputation before him. And then he opened his mouth and he was really shy and diffident and had a bit of a stutter and fumbled over his words. You can afford to be a bit shy and diffident if you're a great big hulking that is
brutal
true.
bastard, can't you?
That is true. But the kind of Paddy Mayne, the kind of big growling Paddy Mayne who goes around kicking arse and wrecking bars in Cairo and all the rest of it. That character comes to the fore only when he's had an absolute skinful. And it seems that he was something of a manic depressive, I think. Well, and he was probably an alcoholic. Yeah. But he was a very, very extraordinary man. I mean, all the praise you hear of him is entirely deserved. I mean, he's one of those kind of supermen.
But he's also he's arguably one of those people. If the war hadn't come along, what would he have done with his youth? With that period of his life, he'd have played rugby. He'd have been a barrister, and it's sort of, there are people who wore absolutely just suits. Yeah. There's no better way of putting it, I think. Yeah. And he is someone. And Peter Fleming is another really good example.
And George Jellicoe. He was also in the SS and then commands the SBS. I mean, I remember interviewing him, and he was just amazing. I mean, for him, being in the SAS, being in the SBS, it was like being in the Boy Scouts with guns. I mean, he just loved every second of it. He loved being in danger. He loved shooting people. He loved kind of sort of, stalking onto Leros in the middle of the night and all that kind of stuff and riding into Athens on a bicycle. He just couldn't get enough of it. I mean, he was the most amazing guy, and of course, son of the famous admiral. Yeah, he was the guy who told me that the reason he didn't join the Navy was because even as a 17-year-old, he had the rather unfortunate habit of wetting his bed, and he didn't want to piss on the person below if he was in a hammock.
Well, I also expect it's just plain fucking embarrassing. But there we go. Yeah, Sorry, I've dropped the.
But this was why he joined the army rather than the Navy. It's just so brilliant.
Tony Stone says, doesn't beating up dockers affect the operational factor? And I think I think what Tony's trying to do is get you to say operational factor.
Well, the operational factor, of course, is absolutely key to the whole thing.
There we go, fantastic. Now we have a question from Rob44. In Commando Men, about a Royal Marine in northwest Europe, the writer mentions German troops using a mobile brothel in Normandy close to the front lines. Was this a common practice?
Yes. It absolutely was, and it was really, really well. So what the Germans did was they had these, they had the hated Feld gendarmerie who have these rather elaborate chains and sort of dog tabs that they put around their necks. They're absolutely loathed by everyone, and they're incredibly strict. And basically, if you want to go to a brothel, what you have to do is you have to go and get checked out by the doctor first. You get handed a French letter. You get told, what you can do and what you can't do. You hand over your cash, your pfennigs. You get given a docket and off you go and do your business. And then when you come back, you have to be checked again. And if you don't do that, then, you literally can be shot.
But that's actually not really particularly different to what the British Army did. But I mean, apart from the being shot bit at the end, the British Army really did make sure that its men's sexual health was looked after. And of course, I'm sure we've talked about this before the podcast. In 1940 or late 39, I think, when Montgomery gets into trouble with sort of polite society, because he writes a memo about horizontal refreshment and says that if the men need to do this, they're going to do this. So what we need to do is keep tabs on it, and we need to there need to be approved brothels and all this sort of stuff. And he got into all sorts of trouble, and nearly, another one of those occasions where he nearly lost his job for telling the truth. And it's really, Stan Lee, I don't know if people know this, people probably know this. Stan Lee, he who invented the Incredible Hulk, Fantastic Four, Spider-Man. In the war, he worked for American, because he wanted to be a writer. He ended up in the army as a GI writing VD propaganda.
No way. I never knew that.
Yeah. That was one of his first professional writing jobs. Was he wrote all those sort of all those kind of don't get VD whatever you do, and that was also. I mean, be careful of the ladies of easy virtue, like watch yourself and all that. I mean, it's very much of its time.
Yeah.
But he was involved in that incredibly and was part of the army education drive to try and make sure that because a sick man, a man off with
is no use to any man.
Yeah,
and he's certainly not used to a fighting army.
He's lost to the enemy and all that. That syphilis was another enemy. This obviously was a thing the army really, really had to keep tabs on. So. Because I remember talking, you read accounts of Normandy, queues at brothels, especially after the Great Swan when they're broken out. Queues at brothels at Antwerp. Great lot because of course by the time you get to by the time Antwerp's been captured and the sort of front stabilises aftermarket garden, basically, you do get, Antwerp turns into this enormous furlough place where people, get their time off and come back and there's, there's a sort of civilised rear area that hasn't been smashed up like Normandy. And you get people, great long queues at brothels, and it becomes part of what you do on your time out.
Yeah, I remember my great friend Bill, who lived in Charleston and was in the US Marine Corps, and he'd been on Okinawa, and him and his mates after Okinawa they were put on, they were sent to Shanghai and for some downtime.
Yeah,
and basically they just sort of hoard their way through the city. And sort of got all that pent up aggression, emotion, all the rest of it out of them. I mean, it sounds so barbaric and awful, but if you've just been through the bloodiest battle of all in the Second World War, I guess that's what you need to do. And interestingly, he then eventually got back home and bought a Harley and went off on a 1 month driving trip all around America. Came back home, told his parents absolutely anything, and he said, I didn't spare them any details at all, and he said, and I've never had any nightmares. And of course,
that's very interesting.
He's a unique case, but he was very much an advocate of it's good to talk. So
Peter Johnston again,
and Shaq, presumably.
Peter Johnston says VD was a huge problem for the British in post-war Germany, and despite the non-fraternisation rule. Well, we all know how well the non-fraternisation rule panned out.
Yeah.
And then Mick says VD was still a problem for the British Army in Germany in 1984. Smiley face. So.
Is that a smiley face? It is a smiley face. You'd have thought he'd be having one of those faces with tears coming out the side, wouldn't it?
And then, yes. And then Philip Trousdell says, when I was an officer cadet at Sandhurst, we were told that only generals and chaplains could catch VD from loo seats. That's very, very, very good. Okay, now, questions. Some questions that are coming in as we go. Insert generic well done. This is from Adam. Alan James, we often say necessity is the mother of invention. With that in mind, which nation during the Second World War proved to be the most innovative in solving the challenges they came across?
Well, it's probably not going to be any great surprise when I say it was definitely the Allies. I think it's not just about innovation. I think the point about innovation is it's not just coming up with innovation for innovation's sake. It's coming up with the right innovation. And I think the two things go hand in hand. And I think, obviously, the Germans being the first people to send a man-made object into outer space is, that's quite innovative by anyone's reckoning. No one can doubt that. Creating the ME-163 Comet, getting the ME-262 in the air for the first, as an operational aircraft for the first time, creating the Type 21 U-boat. Which is the benchmark for all future post-war submarines and is the world's first proper submarine as opposed to a submersible, which is what most Allied submarines are in the Second World War. All of that is pretty amazing. But how useful was it, and did they do it at the right time? And the answer would have to be no. Whereas what you see from the British and the Americans particularly is their focus is just so good. And I think that's the difference. And I would single out as one thing, the cavity magnetron, I think, is one of the greatest inventions that emerged out of the Second World War, which I think is invented in November 1940. And it is what enables you to reduce the size of your radar aerial. So instead of having a 270-foot high lattice work aerial on the coast at Dover or Ventnor or wherever it might be, actually it's so small you can put it on a destroyer or a corvette or inside a Wellington or a very long range B-24 Liberator. And that is quite a big game changer, because it means you don't have to have all those sort of TV aerials that the Germans have later on in the war on the front, causing drag and all the rest of it. And also the other thing is that the Germans never know that we've invented it, ever, during the Second World War. So it's a huge advantage, but there's so many different things. I mean, what is discovered is incredible.
Mundane, right?
Yeah,
people suggesting synthetic fuel, ejector seats, so on. Plastic armour, right? Invented by a solicitor, a guy called Edward Tyrrell, who was a gentleman inventor. What he realised is if you put bitumen, basically, he invents this thing that can be applied to ships that reduces the shock of bullets and stuff. And he sees that ships have been patched. He sees this paddle steamer that's been patched with a combination of bitumen with cork in it. Right. It's a highly flexible material, and so he goes to the government and he pitches this idea, and it doesn't work. And someone says, "Well, hang on a minute. If we fill this with bitumen, if we fill this with stone, basically, we can invent a flexible, applicable surface to ships that works as armour rather than steel." Because the economy has had to shift its emphasis, they're not building roads, so there's loads of asphalt, there's loads of bitumen, and so you're able to then create this plastic armour stuff that goes on ships that's this innovate, and it's not glamorous. I mean, I think this is what's interesting, is a lot of these innovations aren't glamorous. They aren't DD tanks, they aren't the Mulberry, and so on. It's a really, really, really interesting idea, and there's all that going on at the same time, and the British are very receptive. The British are very, very receptive to this stuff, and I absolutely know that the headline things are the tanks, and I mean Andrew Twist pops up with penicillin. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and pykrete not so much, but it's a good idea at the time. But penicillin, absolutely. Alexander Fleming invented that. I mean, again, the Germans never have that. The Soviet Union never has that. Japanese never have that. It's such a game changer. And by 1944 on the battlefield, 1 in 4 casualties that are getting to hospital are getting returned to the battlefront, and that is, really, it is all about welfare and morale, but it's also about pragmatism as well. And I think that generally speaking, the Western allies particularly are just so much more efficient at fighting wars, which is one of the reasons why at the end of the war, the number of dead of Americans, Canadians and British and so on is considerably less than all the other major combatants, even though they've been involved in the war in sort of every corner of the globe. That's not because we haven't been trying, it's because we fought a much more efficient war.
That's it for now. We've got to take a break. We'll be back shortly.
I'm Mike. I'm known as Boats. I'm afraid to say I've been away twice.
Rob, 33 from southwest London. Unlike Boats, I learned my lesson. I've only done one stint inside.
I am Claire. I've not been inside. Well, I've spent many days inside, but no nights inside custody. I've been a prison lawyer for over 10 years now.
You don't get told anything. So you get put in a cell and you don't know when you're next coming out. You don't know what's happening. I didn't have a clue what was going on.
What's it come to? I'm sat in a prison cell with up the walls, counting out own brand hobnobs.
It's not a holiday camp.
Well, that became pretty apparent quite quickly,
Describe the effects of what Spice is doing to people.
Somewhere between asleep and fitting and having a heart attack. So you have
it's actually quite scary to see it.
When the World Cup football on, it was like being down the local pub. I mean, we used to joke about it. There was one cell we used to call the Stagger Inn.
I've heard of people fitting up iPhone 5s up their arse. iPhone 5's like quite wide and long. That's f***ed.
Banged Up, a new podcast from Goalhanger Films on life in a British prison. Get banged up wherever you find your podcasts.
Welcome back to We Have Ways of Making You Talk. Okay, from Pete, loves the podcast.
Thanks, Pete.
Your knowledge and enthusiasm for your subjects is a real tonic in these troubled times. I should say so. It's given me stuff to read about. My question is, did the Germans have any successes in cracking the Allied codes in the way that Bletchley Park did? I've read that the French encryption was pretty easy to break, but I haven't heard about Axis powers breaking into British or American ciphers.
Yeah, they did, and notoriously so in the in North Africa. They did. They had lots of codes, and the Japanese broke lots of American codes as well, and British codes. It was happening all the time. But we were more canny with our coding. We had more foolproof encryption devices. They didn't, nothing like on the same level that we were cracking.
In the desert, one of the big problems was that the American military attaché he'd been cracked, hadn't he?
Yes,
and was
exactly.
basically reporting back to Washington, going, "Oh, they're going to do this next. They get, there's this big push coming, and blah blah blah." And the Germans knew all about.
Yeah,
things
and
like
if I remember
Crusader.
rightly, they were overrun at Alam Halfa, weren't they, at the very end of August? Which is one of the reasons why the Germans are so in the Germans and the Italians are so in the dark about Alamein. But obviously, they knew what was going on. I mean, it's all that other stuff, isn't there? All those deception things about sort of Masculine, the magician, who did all that kind of sort of smoke and mirrors stuff. I'm just not that convinced by all that stuff, I've got to say.
Okay.
I think the Germans knew they were coming and sort of pretty much what they were going to do.
Yeah. Right. From Andy H. My nan used to swear blind that she was pushing her mum in her pram in 1939 in Liverpool. A lone German plane flew overhead and the pilot waved to her. Could that have happened? She also claimed to have invented hockey, so I've always taken that claim with a pinch of salt.
Don't think so. Not in 1939. 1940, yes, but it wouldn't have been a fighter plane because they wouldn't have been able to reach there. So it had to have been a bomber, lone bomber coming over. Could have been a reconnaissance plane. Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. Okay.
So I've got, so there's a guy in my village who absolutely swears blind that the Graf Zeppelin flew down the Chalk Valley in 1939.
Really?
Yeah, the summer of 1939. Now, what did happen was...
they sent Zeppelins out to test the radar, didn't they?
They did, and then they
and
flew back again. Now, is it possible that they could have flown back inland and flown back out over Southampton?
Well, is it possible they got lost?
Yes. Yes. So it is all possible. It's just, he says, I can remember it. He said, I looked up and I heard this amazing kind of sort of faint whirring and I could see it and it was coming all the way from Salisbury and I looked at and watched it as it flew directly over the village. I mean, it was so vivid, his memory. You can't possibly kind of see how he could have been mistaken in that. But, memory's a weird thing.
Yeah. But or it was the R1. It was one of the R100.
No, because that was. The R100 blew up in 1930. Didn't it?
R101 blew up in yeah. So what R101 that blew up? On its way.
Yes, it was. Yeah.
Because I grew up around Bedford where there's these enormous Cardington hangars that were built for the R101.
Oh yeah, they're enormous, aren't they?
Yeah,
designed by Barnes Wallis.
So gigantic.
Designed by Barnes Wallis.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And now. Where they made the Batman films in there. Anyway, we're really off subject now. We're going to talk about Batman films. Yes. Now we have another question, and we're going to get stuck into this, I expect. This is from Russell Chapman. Was the single most important order? Yes, it did crash in France. I know. Yes. Was the Glenn was the single most important order in the Second World War the infamous halt order of 24th May 1940?
God,
if so, can you once and for all assign responsibility for it to Hitler or von Rundstedt or even Goering? Cheers, lads. Loving the pod, especially the brilliant book recommendations.
Yes, I think I can assign it to Hitler. Okay, so there's all sorts of ghastly theories about this. So basically what happens is might get my dates muddled up, but so give me a day or two's grace. But I think what happens is it's on the 23rd of May 1940. And the Panzer Group A, Army Group A, the Panzer Group Kleist, which is under Guderian, have surged forward. Rommel is surging forward as well, and they have this opportunity to completely encircle the BEF and the French that are in the northern pocket.
Yeah.
And what happens? But von Kleist is very nervous that his panzers have got ahead of his infantry, and so he orders a halt to the panzers. Says just hold fire and let everyone else catch up. And Guderian and everyone comes back and goes, "Are you mad? This is insane because we have got this opportunity to completely encircle the whole northern pocket of the French and British. We need to push on." He goes, "No. And Guderian and von Rundstedt, rather, who is the commander of Army Group A, confirms von Kleist's order.
Yeah.
When this is relayed up to army headquarters, up to Franz Halder, who is the chief of staff of the army, and von Brauchitsch, who is the commander of the army, he realises this is absolutely insane, and so makes a decision to hand the Panzer Group Kleist, over to the authority of Army Group B, which is attacking from the north.
Yes.
And says, right, instead of the Panzers now being the Hamel and Army Group B being the anvil, we will turn it around. So Army Group A can be the anvil, and Army Group B can be the hammer, and we can continue and complete this encirclement. The following day, the 24th of May, Hitler visits von Rundstedt and says, "What's going on? How are the panzers?" And von Rundstedt goes, "Well, my Führer, I don't know, because the panzers have been handed over to Army Group B." And the Führer goes absolutely apeshit and goes, "What? How dare they do this? How can that's something of that magnitude be agreed without consulting me first? Blah, 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 blah." Lots of spittle, lots of bad breath, etc., etc. And he goes straight back to von Brauchitsch, straight back to Holder, says, "Don't you dare do something like that again." Hands the panzer straight back to Army Group A, and von Rundstedt upholds the halt order. And Hitler says it's now von Rundstedt's decision as to when he undoes that halt order and says that they can move again. So everything's back to as it was. And in that interregnum, because they don't get the order to release until I think it is the 27th of May, and they're not on the move again until the morning of the 28th, Operation Dynamo has started, evacuation of the BEF, and they've been able to get it out. Ever since they get the BEF out, and the encirclement never happens, which is why we have Dunkirk and all the rest of it. So it is a really major cock up from the point of from the Germans, and it's dangerous doing what ifs, but you can't see really how they could have failed to do that complete encirclement had Halder had his way and had Guderian had their way. Yeah. In the meantime, Goering, who is hovering over Hitler's shoulders, goes, "Oh, don't worry about it, mein Führer. My Luftwaffe can deal with these guys anyway, these hopeless RAF and the pathetic BEF." And Hitler goes, "Great, well, time to crack on then." And of course they don't, because they're not able to. But there was this theory that Hitler was doing it because he sort of wanted Britain to get away and all this sort of nonsense. It's nothing to do with that at all. It is purely 100% about Hitler showing who is the daddy man and showing the army command that they can't basically kind of muck around with him. And everything has to go through him. He is the absolute supremo.
But so much of this is born of the fact that no one expected any of it to work. No. They were in a situation they never actually imagined would come off.
No.
In fact, they far exceeded their expectations with Fall Gelb. The whole thing, and that basically the Allies had delivered the victory to the Germans by doing everything that was asked of them, really. And so then what happens is they have to start making decisions. Because they'd made all their decisions, hadn't they? So they're suddenly having to start making decisions. And then you get into actually who's in charge, who's boss. And of course, if you've got Hitler in the mix, he's boss, isn't he?
Yeah.
And he wants to claim this victory for himself rather than say the generals are responsible.
Yes.
So he's trying to lay down the law and say this is who's in charge here. But also you're 2 weeks into the campaign, everyone's exhausted. The gear's falling, the tanks are beginning to fall apart. Ammunition is an enormous issue because at the start of the First World War, the Germans nearly ran out of ammunition. So and there was an ammunition scandal during the First World War. And it was an issue that everyone remembered and hung heavy in people's minds in terms of procurement. And so you've got that whole thing of a big part of the steel effort that's supposed to go to U-boats, supposed to go to tanks, supposed to go to the Ju-88, that actually the steel's being spent on ammunition.
Yeah.
And they're worried they're worried that stocks are going to run out, and you've got all this because it's supposed to be a short war. The plan is for a short knockout blow. Then it works. They're caught in the army itself is sort of caught out by its own success, and then of course the politicians get involved and go, well, actually I'm in charge here, not Halder, not von Rundstedt, not anyone else, and Hitler steps in and makes the decision for everybody, and of course. He was quite capable of making terrible decisions. Hitler, I think
I think this is the point. This is what one has to understand. I remember writing this book once, and someone reviewed it and says, how dare Holland say that Hitler was a military nincompoop because did he not realise that Hitler voraciously studied military history and read his history and all the rest of it? And I thought, well, what a stupid thing to say. I mean, I've studied history, but obviously, I'd be absolutely crap as a field marshal or commander of an army. I wouldn't have a clue. So the things don't go together at all. And the point about Hitler is, he really was just a half-jack in the First World War. He never went to staff college. Yeah, he read a few books and stuff. But also, by 1940, he starts to become convinced of his own brilliance and genius because he's surrounded by sycophants who sort of go, yes, mein Führer, you're the best, mein Führer, can I, do unspeakable things to you, mein Führer. And he started to believe it. But the truth is he is totally ill-equipped and untrained in every regard to be making these sort of decisions. And the fact that he's making a decision of that magnitude purely out of spite and to show who is the daddy man, to sort of get one over the army high command, just goes to show what a kind of woeful and inadequate person he is as an army commander.
Which book would you recommend on this? It's the Freisler, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes, Karl-Heinz Frieser. Frieser, I think it is, because it's Frieser. F-R-I-E-S-E-R. Karl-Heinz Frieser, and he's an ex-German army colonel and very pronounced historian, and he wrote a book called Blitzkrieg Legend, and he goes into this in very, very great detail, and it's impossible to disagree with anything he says, to be perfectly honest. I mean, he's absolutely nailed it once and for all. And all those other conspiracy theory nonsense ideas just need to be kicked into touch. Yeah.
Okay. Just on our sidebar, Hydor says an old boy I know was part of Operation Varsity, which had 75 years ago had just kind of happened. And remember standing on the banks of the Rhine and hearing the hell of a racket as an ME-262 flew along the course of the river. It was belching black smoke, presumably because of the poor fuel it was burning. He said it sounded like a badly tuned bus.
Well, it might have been hit by a Hawker Tempest. I mean, Talking of Tempest, I just want to mention the Hawker Typhoon Preservation Group, because it is the 75th anniversary today of the shooting down of RB396, which is this Typhoon, which is being restored currently somewhere in Sussex, down at Goodwood. And they're an amazing bunch of people that are putting this together. And on the 1st of April, 1945, Flight Lieutenant Chris House was flying this particular Typhoon and attacking a kind of German column on the ground. And got hit by some light flak and had to crash land. And he was safe, he was fine, and he survived the war and all the rest of it. But the Typhoon had to be abandoned. It later got picked up and got put in a museum in Holland, and it was then bought in 2012. And ever since then, they've been restoring it bit by bit, painstaking effort. Yeah. But as you know, Al, I'm a massive fan of the Typhoon and the Tempest, and I would just so love to see a Typhoon flying again. I really, really would. It would just be the most amazing thing. And they've got a Napier Sabre engine in absolutely perfect condition. It's good to go. They've run it up, all the rest of it. It's all absolutely fine. And it will happen, but they need lots of support. So if anyone wants to get involved with that, if you look up just the Hawker Typhoon Preservation Group, you'll find it on Facebook. You'll find there's a web page and all the rest of it. But 75 years ago today. So
as Sterrett and someone else earlier pointed out, it's the RAF's birthday today. Course.
Yes, it is. Yeah,
from formed on April Fool's Day.
Yeah, 102.
Let's not get into the fact it was formed on April Fool's Day. Right, okay. Now, Dauntless says... Now, this is... Here we go. As we know, Allied tankers say they feared the Tiger tank, but what Allied tank did the Axis fear most? Sherman Firefly, ? Bog standard Sherman due to weighted numbers? As for British tanks, what were the winners and losers? Thanks in advance.
Oh, my God. How long have we got? Actually, Al, this is a perfect opportunity to show some of your models.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
okay,
hold
so
the line,
Al has got the most amazing collection of tank models. I hadn't realised what a closet modeler he was, but I've got to say, he's pretty darn good at them.
Check out this bad boy. M10 Achilles. Look at that.
Whoa.
I'll just move Monty out the way. There we go.
Look at that. I mean, look at the detail on that.
There we are.
You're a proper tank modeler nerd. It's
17
fantastic.
pounder.
You really have inspired me. I honestly, when I've got this bloody book done, that is what I'm going to do. My self-isolation holiday treat is going to be creating a definitely. It's got to be Sherman, hasn't it? But I've got to say, in terms of the one they most feared, I reckon. I mean, from all the kind of literature I've read on and listened to German accounts and all the rest of it, boy, they did not like the crocodile.
Yeah.
And who can blame them? Something that can fire a jet of 120 yards of napalm. I mean, thank you.
And yes, Gareth says it's not a tank. Yes, I know
it's not
a tank destroyer.
I know. Okay,
it's a tank destroyer.
Okay.
All right,
but
what else
is
in it? Let's see what else is in a
that
tank.
can spew flame. Okay, so I'm calling it a tank for the purposes of this discussion.
Sorry, James, I could.
What we got now?
There we go. What's that?
Yeah.
It's an Archer, which is a Valentine chassis with a 17-pounder, and the gun points backwards. So you fire the thing, and then you depart the scene of the crime. I think it's pretty clever.
So I've got to. I've just been writing about Hummels, German assault guns, 155mm assault gun howitzers. Yeah. Well, he talks about. He says it's a heavy assault gun howitzer, is what he calls it. He says I am in the 3rd Battalion of the Hermann Goering Panzer Regiment, and I am in the heavy assault gun platoon. I think he calls it. Well, it's an Abteilung, isn't it? But it's not a battalion. He's just in that particular bit. But anyway, I can't see that in July 1943 it could have been anything other than a Hummel. A bumblebee.
Yeah.
Soft name for a
155mm. A nasty thing.
But he's certainly on a hill firing out to sea, so it's got to be something that can lob a shell a fair old distance. I don't think 105 would be able to chuck it that far, would it?
Terry says, why did it take us so long to put sloping armour on our British tanks? Because... we didn't think it was the right solution to the problem. You have these two philosophies. You've the infantry tank, which is the Churchill, and super thick armour, slow, built like a brick outhouse, can go up very steep hills. An infantry support tank, an integrated infantry weapon, and then you have the cruiser tank philosophy. Which, and of course, what happens at the end of the war is they give up on that altogether, and you get basically the precursor to the main battle tank. I think
the whole sloping armour is a little bit of a kind of is a tiny bit misleading, to be perfectly honest, because you only have sloping armour really on the front, and so much of a tank's time they're not kind of facing straightly down the barrel of the person that's trying to shoot them. That's how they get destroyed. So there are inherent problems with sloping armour of the kind of design of the hull. I mean, obviously it works for Sherman and it works for Panther and so on. But it's not. It's not the kind of. It's not. That is the solution to your armour issue.
Yeah,
there are other ways of doing it.
Well, also most armoured. Here's the thing: most armoured encounters in Normandy were very close. You'd go round a corner. There'd be a self-propelled gun there. Who'd fire one off at you and then vanish to a prearranged second firing position. Blah 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 blah. The big open encounters, like say Goodwood, are not the norm. The reason Goodwood is such a magnet for controversy, I think, a discussion is because it's not what's going on in Normandy in general.
It's not normal. I mean, the Goodwood is not normal to have those two armoured divisions sort of operating side by side. That is not how they do things, and they're doing it to try and save save infantry because they're running short of infantry, but actually it doesn't complete opposite effect because actually you've still got lots of infantry involved in the battle and lots of them become casualties.
David Yields says sloping armour compromises internal crew space. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, that's my point. There's always kind of arguments for both sides.
Yeah. Right. Well, I think that's about all we've got time for.
Golly, that's gone really, really quickly.
It's flown by, and I've enjoyed enormously watching everyone chipping in along the side.
Yeah.
It's been absolutely fantastic to hear from you all.
And I'm sorry we haven't answered more of those questions because they're brilliant.
That's right. The flying dustbin, Glenn. Absolutely, the flying dustbin is spigot mortar, a relation, of course, a relation of the Piat. And there we are.
And there's one of those Churchill tanks with the huge dustbin mortar just outside from Juno Beach. Yeah, is it Juno? No, and it's been painted a horrible colour. It's painted a completely wrong green.
And I think they've got one in the restoration shed at Bovingdon as well.
They have. They absolutely have that amazing shed. Wow! If you haven't been there, once everything opens up again,
anyway, that's all we've got time for. Remember, you can hear a chapter of the day of the brilliantly vivid novel "The Cauldron," written by Zeno, based on his actual experiences at the Battle of Arnhem. This is the book we've been reading from. Here's the cover, although it has several covers.
Yep. I've been trying to show up other covers on Twitter, but yeah, it's the most fantastic book. And I've got to say, Al, what I've heard of your readings, you do it damn well. You're doing it justice.
Thanks very much, James. That's very sweet of you. And of course, who was Zeno? This is a good question. He was called Gerald Lamarck, and he was a lifelong criminal. Basically, con man, and ended up in Wormwood Scrubs for murdering his wife's lover in a hotel in Swansea, and was taught to write by George Blake, the traitor, who then escaped from Wormwood Scrubs, so jumping over the wall and landing in a lorry with a mattress. Oh, right, that's my front door. I'm obviously out of time. That's my doorbell.
Well, it really is time to go.
Anyway, it's time to go. Thanks everyone for listening. Thanks for watching if you were watching. It's been our absolute pleasure. We have ways of making you talk. Auf Wiedersehen.
Cheerio.